And now the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a daily exploration into how philosophy, psychology, and technology shape how we think, feel, and live.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. He forgot the gift. A snowstorm had interrupted nothing but the ordinary, coating the Charles Bridge in a fine geometry of hesitation. Kepler was on his way to a party, an obligation draped in formality and frost, and it was only halfway across the bridge that the absence struck him. No token, no offering, no clever object to honour his benefactor. Only snowflakes, catching on his sleeve like apologies he hadn't meant to make. He felt the cold settle into the fabric, a wet trace against his wrist, as if the weather were marking time in his place. That's when he looked closer. Each flake was different, that was obvious. But that wasn't what held him. What caught him, what pressed in slow and exact, was that they were all somehow the same. A sixness, a repetition without repetition. Not just beauty, but order. Not just order, but insistence. Why six? What begins as a detail becomes a threshold. Symmetry not as decoration, but as a sign. Not of design, but of constraint. Kepler didn't have quantum mechanics, he didn't have molecular models or electron shells, but he had the shape, he had the ache of unanswered regularity, a flake of water, a flake of doubt. The mind does not need data to sense law. He imagined the seeds of pomegranates, the tessellations of bees. He turned the hexagon in his mind like a confession. Noticing, not knowing. He called it a knock on the doors of chemistry. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a knock from the other side. What symmetry shows us, long before it explains, is that nature is less invention than permission, that every molecule, every organ, every fruit split open on a summer table is following rules it cannot name. That beauty, when seen closely, is a map of restriction. You think symmetry is a surface, but it is a residue, a consequence of something quieter. Bond angles, energy minimization, electrons folding into their lowest states like children into sleep. The water molecule makes an angle because that is what it must do. And from that angle, the snowflake. From the snowflake, the pattern. From the pattern, the astonishment. Kepler had no equations, but he had snow. He had the precision of observation and the courage to ask a question with no hope of answer. And maybe that is the real symmetry, not in the flake, but in the gaze. The return, again and again, of the mind to what it cannot name, but cannot stop noticing. Some truths don't begin in reason, they begin in error, in forgetting the gift and receiving a pattern instead. There's a kind of humility built into patterns, not in their existence, but in how they wait to be seen. A snowflake doesn't announce itself, it lands, melts, disappears. Its symmetry is never performed, it simply is. And yet, once noticed, it changes the way we notice everything else, the bark of a tree, the branching of lungs, the arrangement of petals in a flower we were about to ignore. This is not nature showing off. It's nature settling into what works. What repeats is what survives. What echoes is what fits. And what fits often looks like grace, but is really just the most stable answer to a question we didn't know was being asked. It's easy to mistake symmetry for perfection, to imagine it as something imposed from outside, a kind of cosmic elegance handed down. But symmetry is rarely neat. It bends, it fractures, it tries again. It offers resemblance, not replication. Balance, not mirror. The snowflake carries that lesson. Each one holds the rules, but also the weather, the drafts, the currents, the shifts in temperature that warp it slightly, make it incomplete. The law remains, but the outcome stutters, and in that stutter, individuality. There is something beautiful in that failure to fully repeat, something human. Kepler might have sensed it without saying, that the gift he forgot gave him something truer than if he'd remembered. That the apology written in snow on his coat sleeve was also a kind of permission to not understand fully but to keep noticing anyway. The sixness of snow is not just mathematics, it's a gesture, a quiet reminder that even in chaos, certain angles return. That even in forgetting, some things arrive right on time. We tend to believe that understanding comes from answers, that clarity follows explanation, but symmetry refuses this. It arrives first as recognition, not conclusion, a sense that something is right before we can say why, like walking into a room and knowing it's in balance, like hearing a chord that doesn't resolve but doesn't need to. Kepler's snowflakes were not arguments, they were invitations, not to solve, but to dwell. To stay with a shape long enough that it starts to shape you, to wonder without rushing toward usefulness. He wasn't looking for proof, he was watching for patterns. And sometimes that's the deeper kind of truth, the one that repeats before it reveals. Today we can model water, simulate crystal growth, predict the branching paths a flake will take as it falls. We can reduce symmetry to consequence, to inevitability. And still, the wonder remains, not despite the explanation. Because knowing doesn't always undo awe, sometimes it frames it. The angle in the molecule isn't just a bond, it's a memory of tension, a compromise between forces. And maybe that's what symmetry really is, a record of resolution. The shape that results when nothing gets everything it wants. So we find it everywhere, in shells, in galaxies, in the lines on a beetle's back, in music and molecules and mistakes that keep returning until we finally see the pattern beneath them. Symmetry is what happens when contradiction holds still for a moment, when chaos arranges itself just long enough to leave a trace. We're not separate from that. Our breath follows rhythms, our thoughts loop, our faces carry echoes of the ones who came before. We try to be original, but we are built of repetitions. Even our forgetting repeats. Kepler saw it in snow. You might see it in silence, in the way certain feelings return, not to torment you, but to suggest a structure, to say, look again, this too might be a pattern, this ache, this joy, this strange symmetry of being alive. Not every pattern is gentle, some insist, some trap. Symmetry isn't always beautiful. It can be rigid, recursive, even cruel. A loop that won't break, a gesture passed down until it becomes reflex. A law that governs not just snowflakes but suffering. There are structures in nature that repeat because they must, not because they should, and we carry those too. Think of shame, of grief, of decisions made before we're old enough to choose. Think of the family face, the tone you swore you'd never use but find in your own mouth. These are symmetries too, emotional hexagons folded over generations. What looks like inheritance may just be persistence. Kepler didn't name that, but maybe he felt the edge of it, walking that bridge alone, snow touching him into attention, the world pressing a message into his coat without asking if he wanted it. He read it as beauty, as order. But order is not always kind. Some patterns do not liberate, they fix. Still, to see a pattern is to loosen its grip. Recognition begins to make space. When a loop is seen, it starts to become a spiral, not just repetition, but movement, return, altered. We can't always break what binds us, but we can notice the rhythm, breathe between its beats, and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes a shape repeats until it softens, until it says, I'm not here to trap you, I'm here to remind you that even constraints can be held with care. That you are part of a symmetry that didn't begin with you and won't end with you, but which you can still touch, still trace, still turn toward the light, because the snowflake, for all its structure, still falls. It doesn't resist the air, it doesn't question the drift, it dissolves without apology, and in doing so, becomes not less beautiful, but more. Maybe that's the deeper symmetry, not in the structure itself, but in the way it lets go. We think of letting go as an end, as a vanishing. But what if it's a return, not to the same place, but to the same truth seen from elsewhere? What falls doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it changes state. Ice to water, pattern to memory, question to presence. The snowflake lands, melts, and is gone, but not before it was seen, not before it showed something brief, exact, and quiet. A structure that held, then released, that mirrored not perfection but process, not permanence, but fidelity to form in motion. Kepler walked on, the gift he didn't bring, replaced by a recognition he couldn't wrap. Maybe he said nothing about it at the party. Maybe the snow on his coat was gone before he reached the door. But something stayed. The question, the symmetry, the glimpse. That's what we're left with too. Not an answer, but a shape. Not knowledge, but a kind of alignment. A sense that beneath the surface of things, beneath the chaos, the change, the forgetting, there is an angle that returns, a bond that holds. You don't need to understand it. You don't even need to name it. Just notice. Just pause when the pattern appears. Let it land. Let it melt. Let it matter without conclusion. Some truths arrive like snow, brief, specific, unrepeatable, but real. And if you look closely, if you forget the gift and see what's falling, you might find yourself standing in the middle of a structure that was never separate from you at all. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast, digitally narrated by Holly, who helps bring our ideas to life. And thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. They help us reach more people like you.